There are two different labor market graphs in macroeconomics. The first of which is perfect competition, and the second is monopsony. But first, you must understand what marginal revenue product and marginal resource cost is to fully grasp the concept of the graphs.
Marginal revenue product, or MRP, is the additional revenue generated from using one more unit of the input. Mathematically, it is the change in total revenue divided by the change in the number of inputs, which is also equal to marginal product times marginal revenue. Assume that the final good or service is selling in a competitive market. Then the marginal revenue is equal to the price of the output. This means TR equals Q times P. Also recall that Q is the same as total product. The change in total product as the input changes equals marginal product, MP. So the marginal revenue product is just the change in output that arises from a change in input times the price of the output. This tells us something very important, which is how much this additional input is worth to the firm because of the additional revenue that it generates. The marginal resource cost, or MRC, is the additional cost incurred by employing one more unit of the input. It is calculated by the change in total cost divided by the change in the number of inputs. In a competitive resource or input market, we assume that the firm is a small employer in the market. In other words, the firm will not be able to affect the price of the input regardless of the number of inputs employed. This is much like a firm in a competitive output market that is too small to affect the price. Therefore, it is a price taker. Under these market conditions, the marginal resource cost is the price of the input, wages. When examining the marginal revenue product, we see the law of diminishing marginal returns since each additional unit of the input yields a lower marginal product and thus a lower marginal revenue product. This fact highlights an important difference between demand and derived demand. Derived demand is downward sloping due to the law of diminishing returns, not the income and substitution effects that cause downward sloping demands for consumer goods. In a perfectly competitive labor market, there are no boundaries to enter and exit. There are also many potential workers. Two side-by-side graphs are required. On both graphs, wage rate is on the y-axis and quantity is on the x. The labor market sets the wage rate. The labor market is your typical supply and demand graph. The wage rate is determined where supply and demand intersect. This wage rate is the firm's supply curve, or its MRC. This is because the firm is a wage taker. This also means that the individual firm is perfectly elastic at the market rate. The quantity of labor is determined where the downsloping MRP curve equals its MRC curve. The firm's MRP curve is also its demand curve. Since most of us work, we are predominantly hired by a perfectly competitive market. These jobs include retail, cashiers, and fast food cooks.
A monopsony occurs when a firm has market power in employing factors of production. A monopsony means there is one buyer and many sellers. A monopsony has an upward sloping supply curve, and the MRC does not equal the supply curve because it cannot wage discriminate. The marginal cost of employing one more worker will be higher than the average cost because to employ one extra worker, the firm has to increase the wages of all workers, and the downward sloping demand curve, which is also the MRP. In a competitive labor market, the firm would be a wage taker. If they try to pay only WM, workers would go to other firms willing to pay a higher wage. A monopsony occurs when a firm has market power in employing factors of production. An example of a monopsony occurs when there is one major employer and many workers seeking to gain employment. If there is only one main employer of labor, then they have market power in setting wages and choosing how many workers they employ. In a competitive labor market, the equilibrium will be where D equals S, WPC equals QPC. However, a monopsony can pay lower wages and employ fewer workers. To maximize the level of profit, the firm employs QM of workers where MRC equals MRP. In a monopsony, a minimum wage can therefore increase wages without causing unemployment. Monopsony can lead to lower wages for workers. This increases inequality in society. Workers are paid less than their marginal revenue product. Firms with monopsony power often have a degree of monopoly selling power. This enables them to make high profits at the expense of consumers and workers.